I don't wanna grow up, I'm a curious kid. The world has 100 questions I can play with. So I'll open my arms and eyes and wonder every day till the day I die. No one really knows why gravity exists. My name is Jack Conti. I'm a co-founder and the CEO here at Patreon. Welcome to our office. Woo! Patreon, for those of you who don't know, is ongoing funding for creative people who put awesome things on the internet. And if you want to learn more about that, find somebody with a gray circular sticker with like a little orange P logo in the middle. There are 23 of us walking around, and we want to answer questions and talk to you. And we're always looking for folks who want to help us in our mission of funding and empowering the emerging creative class. So come find us, come talk to us. And if you want to become a patron of Wonderfest, you can do that at patreon.com/Wonderfest. You can very easily support Wonderfest by going there and pledging $1 a month, $2 a month, $1,000 a month. And without further ado, the founder and executive director of Wonderfest, Tucker Hyatt. And one last, sorry, I said without further ado. I lied. I'm a jerk. Give it up for Carly for organizing this event. Huge round of applause to Carly. Yeah, what's up, Carly? Tucker Hyatt.
I love the ado. Thank you, Jack. And thank you, Patreon. It is so nice to be here. And thank you for coming. How sweet. Wonderfest events are normally free, but you've forked over $5 for tonight, and I'm very grateful. Thank you. I want to tell you just a little bit about what Wonderfest is. Its subtitle is the Bay Area Beacon of Science. And Wonderfest patrons, we have 66 of them currently, believe that science insight is important for every individual and for all of society. Wonderfest presents deep and fun public science programs about how the world really works. Because a society that doesn't face reality is a society that's headed for trouble. And if these are ideas that appeal to you, please think about becoming a Wonderfest patron. All right, Jack, thanks, and I thank some folks here at Patreon. I also want to thank some noble Wonderfest volunteers and board members. Thank you, Kendra, for womaning the front desk so ably. Eric is there on video. If your friends couldn't get in tonight or you want to relive this event, that's how good it's going to be. Eric Yao right there is making a video that'll be online in 2017? Maybe two weeks most, yeah. Also, we have Maribel and Jack Fraser, thank you for being here, board directors, and Robert Strong. Where's Robert? All right, the comedy magician. Robert has offered to fill in if we ever have run at Carlos. If you have any trouble tonight, we have another performer for you. Okay, great. Now, to introduce our speaker. Dr. Carlos Duke is a Facebook data scientist. Most every day, he works with Facebook's core data science team to understand people's behavior on large-scale social networks. Carlos earned a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of Buenos Aires and a PhD in computer science from Rutgers University. And before joining Facebook, he was a postdoctoral research fellow at Princeton. Dr. Duke has used his formidable mathematical skills for good, not evil, by studying how World Cup soccer fans change their team allegiances. And, as we shall see, by studying how mortals, such as we, change our romantic relationships. Please welcome Dr. Carlos Duke.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm mostly intimidated by the word science that you used. I hope I'll be able to keep up to that. I'm basically, as he said, I work at Facebook's core data science team. We do a lot of social science research, we do a lot of product research. So I'm going to talk basically about a few studies that we have done in the past year and a half or so that I call love in the time of Facebook. I also like to call them passions in the time of Facebook, because we're going to go a little bit beyond love. I will also talk a little bit about soccer, which is something I like, football. So first, the time of Facebook. Just some numbers to give you an idea of the scale. And this is a very nice map of connections around the world. There are lines connecting all friends in the world. So Facebook today, or as of September of last year, had 1.35 billion monthly active users, 864 million daily active users, around only 17% of them in the US and Canada, so it's very global, and 1.1 million monthly users on mobile. So people roaming around, using their phones, connecting to Facebook, about 700 million of them doing that daily. But this is just part of the picture. The other part of the picture is content production, and this is even older data. It's from March 2013. So this is like my timeline, things that I post on Facebook. Contents like this are generated every day. There are about between 2.5 and 3 billion new content items shared every day. Photos, posts, comments, and shares. More than 3 billion likes are given per day. And more than 400 million photos a day. Now, this was about 2 years ago now, so these numbers are much larger. I just need to update them. So there's what we call the social graph. Facebook, the social graph, all these friendships, all this content being generated, and what I like to think as new opportunities and new challenges. So first, I always think, there's the world out there, there's people interacting in the real world, doing their things, and then there is this code that we call the social graph. Okay, so there's me, I'm a friend with this other person, I posted a photo, I work there, I attended that event, I'm posted that I'm speaking here. All these constitute the social graph, a network of people and content. And the big question to me is how these two things relate. Okay, a question I'm not going to answer tonight, but basically, I'm always thinking about, what's the real world, what's a person's online persona, and how these two things relate to each other, and what can we learn from one about the other. So what we really wish for as social network scientists, data scientists, or whatever people are called these days, is we would like to be able to understand from this social network, social graph, we would like to be able to understand the individual, pairs of individuals, families, and large groups of people. And we also would love to be able to follow this longitudinally, okay? So to understand the individual from now throughout their life. So the longitudinal part is a bit hard right now. Even, Facebook is 10 years old. Data older than 4 or 5 years old is not very reliable. It keeps growing all the time. It keeps changing. So, but we can do a pretty good job along the line of, from people to couples to groups to friends to societies. So I'm going to present just a few case studies. And as I go, I try to bring back a little criticism of the problems that we still have and the methodological questions that we still have, even as we do this, even as we use all this massive data. So I'm going to talk a little bit about couples studying relationships on Facebook, a little bit about sports on Facebook, and then a little bit about the individual, about emotions, and tell you about a preliminary study that I'm hoping to do on well-being. So let's first talk about what we can learn about relationships from the social graph. And I want to credit Mike Devlin, Adrian Frigeri, Maura Burke, Bogdan State, and we all work on this together. Parts of what I'm going to present, some of it is partially my work, some of this is their work. So first, profile information on relationships. So people on Facebook can declare their relationship status, whether they are single, in a relationship, married, in a civil union, or it's complicated. And importantly for these studies, people can also state an anniversary. So they don't not only just tell us, hey, I'm in a relationship, but some people, enough people, thankfully, actually tell you when that changed. Okay? So a lot of these studies are based on people who actually declared an earlier date. So we don't assume that the day they tell Facebook is the day that they started the relationship, probably not. But people who actually declare an anniversary. So let's go through some of the steps of a relationship. So first you're single, and you need to find a yente in your network. Or maybe in the real world. I can't think of any other way of doing it that's not through Facebook. So, a matchmaker, somebody old enough, which this is not true. Actually, we did a study on matchmakers. Most of them are actually young. Again, I'll keep going back to methodological issues because, for example, most people on Facebook are younger than the average population, especially people who decide to answer our surveys. So most of the people that we study in this issue of, how does matchmaking work on Facebook are young, in their 20s, 50% of them were men, 50% of them were single. But importantly, they have more friends than the people that they are matching. So they have like on average, 73% more friends than the people that they are introducing. Further, they have slightly different network structures than the people they are introducing. They tend to have very diverse networks with lots of people who are not friends among each other. So they are these connectors. There's this notion of clustering coefficients, so basically how many of your friends are friends among themselves. So matchmakers tend to have lower clustering coefficients. They know more people that don't know each other. And they also have more isolated friends, friends who are just friends of them and not friends of anybody else in the network. So they introduce people. These people meet, these people become a couple. And there's an interesting trend where people who were not introduced by a friend on Facebook tended to already have more mutual friends on Facebook at the beginning. And then towards the end of not the end of the relationship, sorry, but well into the relationship, they tend to have more common Facebook friends than the people who met some in another way. So then people meet through somebody who introduces them from Facebook, through a common friend, and love starts. So this is looking at people who declared that they started some people can't see. Make sure you get it when you fall off this. So I'll try. So this is the amount of exchanges between two people who are about to become a couple. So the number 0 there, I hope you can see it, is in the middle, is when this relationship actually starts, when they declare that there's this anniversary. So you can see how the amount of exchanges grows as the beginning of the relationship approaches, and then it falls abruptly. I have a positive spin on this, which is that they are spending more time offline, right? Yes. So this is how couples form. They are introduced by a friend on Facebook. That's the only way. Then they exchange a lot of messages on Facebook. Then they start spending time offline, and then they exchange less messages on Facebook. So, okay, the couple is formed. And what can we learn about couples? So this is one of the 2 or 3, I think, one of my favorite studies because they relate. We find correlations between the Facebook data and things that we can learn from outside Facebook. So this is kind of attempts at a relationship between data that's out there, data from the real world, and data from Facebook, online data. So this is the role of religion. So how much does religion matter when people decide to form a couple? And this is maybe a little bit complicated. Oh, what happened? Oh, it's installing the. Okay, that worked.
And you have a laser too.
Oh, laser. Thanks. So we grabbed a bunch of countries and we looked at the distribution of religions in those countries from data that's out there from international organisms. And we looked, what if people didn't care about religion? So if people don't care about religion and they will just form a couple with anyone, there's a certain chance that we can calculate that the couple will be of the same religion, okay? Now it turns out that chance is much, much lower than what we observe, okay? So people in couples tend to be of the same religion at way higher rates than what you would expect from the distribution of religions in their countries. It's fairly low in places like Spain. It's very high in places like Malaysia and places where we can think of religiosity as playing a larger role. Interestingly, if you look in the US, if we compare married against unmarried people, this is the probability that the couple is of the same religion. And we can see that people seem to be willing to date people of different religions more than they're willing to marry them. Again, there's another confound because more religious people tend to marry younger. So, among young people, you see this large gap between, if you're a married 23-year-old, there's an 85% chance that your spouse is of the same religion. If you're just dating at 23 years old, it's only a 70% chance. Okay. So these are two examples that I like. They're also examples of what I call measuring the wrong thing. So we're basically using indirect indications of, we have no idea what people think of religion or whether they choose people about religion or how religious they are, but we have these proxies. We have these proxies that we can use to study it, which is not a direct metric of how much people care about religion when they're forming a couple, but we can use this massive data to at least get an idea. Then we look at the ages of love. So this is basically the age difference between male minus female in at least different sex relationships. And you can see that it basically grows as the age of the male grows. And they tend to be much higher the age differences tend to be much higher in same-sex couples for some reason that I don't know. But it's quite a significant, striking difference. So and this is another one that I really like. So there is this thing called the Global Gender Gap rating that looks at different countries and the degree of gender equality. So the higher this number, the more gender equality there is in these countries. And what we can see is the age difference between the male and the female in heterosexual couples goes down as there is more gender equality in these countries. So you can see that in places like, the usual suspects for gender equality, like Norway, Finland, Sweden, there's a lot of gender equality, and the age difference between the man and the woman is like 2 years. And then on the other extreme, you have places like Egypt, where there is not a lot of gender equality, and the average distance is like 5.5 years, or 5 years. 5 years. So lab forms, people of different ages, religions, get together, and then we can look at how long actually love lasts. Now, this is a good story. So what you can see in the y-axis is there's a probability that couples will split, and how much this probability decreases as time goes by, as this couple has been together. So basically, after 1 year, you're pretty good. So at the end, we looked 5 years. So if you've been together for 1 year, the probability that you're going to split in the next 5 years drops by like 80%. After 6 months, it drops like 40%, and then there are a lot of like summer flings at the beginning. And talking about love that ends, sometimes happens. So this is looking at the days after a separation and the interactions that you get from your friends. Okay? Oh, yeah, I'm suspicious of the intentions of some of those friends, actually. But, so this is 30 days before the breakup and 30 days after the breakup, how much interaction you get from your friends. Like there's a baseline that we call 1. It goes to over 3, so more than 3 times more interactions from your friends the day that your relationship ends. And then it stays higher. It stays like 50% higher for the whole month. And I don't remember for how long, but for quite a bit. Maybe you are more active online. I don't know. So we want to get a little bit deeper from this, maybe I call demographics or whatever, and try to measure a little bit of emotion. So one way you have to measure emotion, there are a lot of techniques in computational linguistics, a lot of them developed by psychologists, basically just lists of words that express certain emotions or positive or negative. One of them is look. Somebody will have to tell me why it's pronounced look, but it is LIYC, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, from the University of Texas at Austin. So they built, through a different set of methods and surveys, a list of 200 words that communicate positive emotions, 350 words that communicate negative emotions. So we're going to measure this ratio of, for posts and messages that people produce, the ratio between positive and negative emotions. So going back to that formation of love, that you saw how it dropped after the couple was formed. On the other hand, we can see that the tone of communication, that the positivity of the communication actually goes up. At the same time that there is less exchange, it becomes more positive, with very large peaks at day 0 and 1 of the relationship, and then it stabilizes at a higher rate. So we have a way of measuring emotions, and we wanted to push this. And I'm going to talk about another way that we have of measuring emotions on Facebook, and basically show you a little bit of the kind of things that we've been doing using that. So one is sport. And as I said, I'm going to talk about passions. Sports tends to be a big passion. And again, I want to acknowledge a bunch of people who worked on this. One of these studies is based on American football. And this is during the 2013 Super Bowl. It's just during the Super Bowl, as time went by. This was the game that, the Denver Broncos beat the Seattle Seahawks? No, the other way around. Seattle beat the Denver Broncos by quite a bit. So as you can see, before the game starts, that's the first dotted line. Already the people from the winning team seem to be a little bit more excited about it. As the game progresses, I don't know, it falls, people get nervous or something, but then it starts to diverge. It starts to split as the winning team starts to win. And then after the game, the winning team's emotions go super high, and the losing team stays there. And I suggest that you look at a study by the people from Pornhub about what happens during these games with people from the losing game. Basically, they measure the traffic to their website from people from the different teams, and you can see. What, sorry? So this is what, the second line is when the game ends. So Sean Taylor from the team, he actually tracked these two teams throughout the whole season. So each little bar here is a week. And then you may not be able to see it very clearly, but the green ones are when the team won, and the red ones are when the team lost. These were the two teams that made it to the Super Bowl, so they mostly won. But you can see that for the whole week in which they lose, the positivity of their fans' content is much lower. It basically lasts the whole week, which is quite amazing. All posts from people who at some point expressed being fans of these teams. They either like the page or yeah. So this is not just their posts about football, it's all their posts. Yes, so they are depressed for the whole week. Yeah. And I'm going to talk a little bit about real football. So that. Thank you. So I was very excited about the 2014 World Cup right until the final. Then I lost interest. I was so excited that I decided to do all this work, and then I just stopped. But basically, we had a kind of a special little page on Facebook, and then we tracked a lot of what people were saying about the World Cup. It's a huge global event, so we counted more than 3 billion interactions in terms of posts, comments, and likes around football, produced by more than 350 million different people, with Brazil and the US as being the top contributors to this conversation. So first, one interesting thing, we wanted to go do some diving through some historical data, is that you can be named after a passion. So this is data from Argentina. The number of kids who were called Diego in 1986, which was the year that Argentina won, with Diego Maradona being the clear star of that whole thing. And there's like some rate. Kids are named Diego in Argentina, about 1 to 1.5% of the kids, at least in 1985 and 6. And then there's this crazy spike at the end of so there's a very dim gray line, but you can imagine where it is, showing how the name Diego spikes to over 6%. And then it kind of falls, but it remains like higher throughout the whole year. What drove me real crazy is that if you really zoom into that data, there was this big game against England, where Diego scored with his hand, then the final. So the day after those two games, this spikes like crazy. 2 days after these games, not so much. So it's like you decide to name your kid Diego because of this game, but 2 days later, it's not worth it anymore. So that was, I really don't understand, but there are crazy things that are going on. The interesting thing is that we look for this effect of names. We actually grabbed all the names of all the players of all the teams since 1966 for all the World Cups. We looked at all the countries, and it doesn't happen with any other player at a significant rate anywhere, except for Diego here and in Brazil. Go figure. Yeah. So in Brazil in 1986, there is a much smaller effect, but there is still an effect. And we also say that passions definitely alter the social graph. So basically, we looked at the subpopulation of people who checked into one of Brazil's host cities during June, which was when the World Cup was started. And we looked at the friendships that began after somebody checked in. So basically, when we see that somebody is in Brazil, probably for the World Cup. And many of the new friendships that were international between people from different countries formed that there. Basically, the rate went very high between people from different countries during the World Cup. So it's this big event where a lot of people meet and they become friends despite a lot of the rivalries and stuff. So we looked at just some most common friendships. You know, the Brazilians were the #1 group of people making friends from foreign countries, of course, mostly with the US, Australia, Argentina, Mexico, and UK. The US a lot with UK and Australia, just linguistic affinity, but also Mexico, Colombia, and Canada, and other pairs like UK and Australia, Mexico and Colombia, Australia and Canada. So we observe very high increases in friendships between people of these countries who have checked in there. Of course, another problem is that we have a biased sample. We're observing people who are highly active, people who have fancy phones and are checking in from Brazil with a heavy influence of people from the US and Brazil. So it's just a little graph of how much the World Cup changed the structure of the graph. Red ones are friendships between Brazilians and somebody from somewhere else, and blue ones are between people from different countries. Just people who were in Brazil for the World Cup. So another study that we wanted to do, that Tucker mentioned, is just fan migration. So what do you do either when your team loses or when there's just another game and you want to root for someone? So we have like basically 3 different ways of measuring this. You could go check the results or the status of a game on Facebook, and there was a little survey asking you in this game, who do you root for, this or that or neither. There was a way of expressing, sorry, we call this minutia. So you know that you can write feeling this or that. You could say looking and choose a game and choose the flag of one of the teams. So a lot of people do that. And then we just looked for very clear text mentions like go Team USA, Allez Bleu, Vai Brasil, or one of these expressions. So this was just to count, basically, who people were rooting for at the moment of each different game. Again, there was a big bias here. The effective size of the data is small because some of the most active people keep rooting all the time. So they come back and they express their fandom for all the games, and they are hard correlation because people express they are rooting for someone and then their friends express who they are rooting for, and so on. But we have a fun visualization where you could basically, for each of the rounds of the World Cup, you could look at a country and see who the people rooting for that country, what was the home country of the people rooting for this country, and then out of the people who were rooting for that country, Argentina here in the round of 16, who are they rooting for in the round of 8? So we saw a bunch of interesting migrations, and I'm going to just mention, this was available, I think it's probably still available online on that link, and you can just go and look at your favorite country and the whole dynamics. So we were able to quantify and look at some of the insights, basically. We started by looking at these faulty rivalries. Brazil and Argentina is like a big rivalry that we pretty much confirmed here. Basically, people from these countries systematically supported each other's opponents. So it was quite amazing how people would take the time to go and say, I'm rooting against Brazil. I'm rooting against Argentina. And there were not a lot of fans from anywhere else. Basically, almost all the supporters in early rounds are from the countries themselves. So 90% of the supporters of Brazil were from Brazil, 78% for Argentina. We saw something not as dramatic, but similar between Germany and Italy. Germans split evenly between like Italy and Uruguay when they played. So you would wonder, you know, a lot of Germans rooting for Uruguay, it's probably more against Italy than for Uruguay. We did observe a lot of continental solidarity. So basically, people from eliminated Latin American or European countries, then rooting for whoever was left from Latin America or Europe, except Greece. So the Greeks, 69% of the Greeks, and there were a lot of Greeks, went in to express their support for a Latin American team. We suspect that one of the reasons is that Germany was playing the semifinal against Brazil and the final against Argentina, and they made a case of expressing their dislike of Germany. But it was quite a dramatic effect. So, I mean, these are fun insights, but I think they're talking, you know, and we cannot establish any sort of causal link, but based on things we know about the world, and we observe these things, and we can come up with some funny theories at least. Then the other huge constituency here was Hispanics in the US. Basically, 33% of the people from the US actually supported the US. 29% were supporting Mexico. 10% were supporting Colombia, and a bunch of other countries. So the US is the lowest in terms of people from the country supporting their team, just basically the diversity here, and the fact that it's still not a huge popular sport here, but it's huge among US Hispanics. And Mexico, for example, gets 50% of its supporters on Facebook, of course, from the US, and only 43% from Mexico. So a lot of, basically all the people of Mexican origin in the US were really active supporting Mexico. So it's not all about big passions, like football, which is huge. But I also want to mention a couple of instances where people are able to express emotions on Facebook, and small observations that we can make there. So one of the ways is that when you post something, you can say feeling and choose one emotion. I think there are like 27 emotions that you can choose from, and then you can type your own. So feeling happy, sad, excited, tired. And we removed fat last week. There were actual petitions on change.org asking Facebook to remove feeling fat, and it was removed. So things that we can observe, for example. So this is data from Colombia, and the blue line is the expression of feeling sad, triste, and you can see this huge spike. One thing that you can see is that there are all these weekly trends, and then suddenly it spikes, and it happened to be the day of the death of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Then the weather. There is this question of how the weather affects the mood. So basically, this is just the positivity. This is averages on a bunch of countries, I think. No, this is only in the US, I think. As the winter of 2014 progressed, you can see that there are all these weekly trends again, but there is this increase in positivity as the temperatures increase, and there's that big spike, which was Valentine's Day. This is just the weather in New York. Fortunately, we can't do this analysis in San Francisco. So this was from February to the 2 months, February and March of 2014 in New York, and you can just see this correlation between the average temperature and the positivity of the stuff that people post. So this is just maybe the top five emotions that are being expressed by age, and you can see this increase. Older people tend to use this a little bit more, but there's also the fraction of feelings, and apparently older people are happier and they feel more blessed. There is all sort of weirdness at the beginning in the teenage years. A lot of teenagers also post like ironic stuff. But even within that, there's like a salad of feelings. And then, you You feel determined through your 30s, then you feel a little bit less determined. You feel tired throughout. There is a little increase in sadness, but there's a huge increase in happiness and blessed. So I was curious about this blessed thing. It has, at least in English, like a religious connotation. So I was looking in the US, like who's feeling blessed, and you can see the distribution of being blessed. Yes. Interesting, California is like fighting it there. Huh? But it's the weather that makes you feel best? Maybe. Yeah, I don't remember the dates of this data, but in general, this was kind of expressed before, but just not just from this feeling expression, just positivity of the text. You can see this increase in age. So, I mean, people of different ages use Facebook in very different ways, but it's clear that older people are expressing more positive stuff. I was surprised, and whenever I say I was surprised, people ask me why, and I don't know why, that male is a bit more positive than female. What do you think? I'm surprised. You're surprised too? Okay, thank you. Yeah. It's probably small, but it's significant, yes. Yeah. Especially with age, well, yes. But throughout. Okay, that's a theory. I don't know. This is US only, so I don't remember the age differences. Okay. So, that was fast. So just one more thing that I would just want to tell you what we're doing, a little bit less passion and just cooling off. So we're trying to see if we can understand somehow well-being. We're working with a guy from an environmental organization. It's like a consortium of environmental organizations. They do a lot of studies about how changes in the environment impact human health, both physical and mental health. We have a lot of work like in Madagascar and in a bunch of places. So one thing that they want to do is like questions like, does visiting national parks make you happier or calmer, or how does it affect your stress levels? So we're basically looking at sending out a large survey to everyone who has been or has not, or at a national park, or who has been to like Vegas, trying to compare what's the effect of this and what's the effect of, on how long this effect lasts. So far we've been able to, I don't have a plot here, but we observed a huge like effect before you go, wherever you're going, and then it falls off pretty quickly. Unfortunately, but we're going to do a bunch of surveys to try to basically get at what people are actually saying about these experiences. And ideally, we're going to try to do like more of a within subject longitudinal design. So keep asking people about their well-being throughout a year or as much time as we can, and then see the effects of visiting or being near or accessing green spaces versus being in other places. And this is another situation where we have what we call uncommon support. Data is very sparse, so not too many people go to these places or post on Facebook about going to these places, and it's hard to get them to answer questions longitudinally. So just to conclude, I think that what we have here is like a daily snapshot of the online activities and like the online personas of a lot of people. Okay? So we know that the way different people use Facebook or social media or other is very different, varies with age, gender, cultural background, wherever they are, who their friends are. But this is a lot of people, and they are producing a lot of content daily. And I think this is kind of unique in like human history in a sense, that we have this daily snapshot. We can study the individual, we can study diet, just pairs of people, couples, friends, interacting with each other in smaller or larger settings. And we have small and large groups at scale, although we don't yet have this kind of data longitudinally. We can go beyond demographics. We can start to understand, and I think this will increase very much in the next few years, we can understand kind of intentions and sentiment and emotions. But there are still lots of methodological and I think epistemological questions to navigate. Throughout this, I try to be very cautious about, when I say this is what's happening online on Facebook, what is happening in society is something that it's not clear what the relationship between those two things are. But ideally, we're going to develop better methods, and we're going to be able to have other data that we can use to compare and try to understand this relationship. And we need questions. So Sean Taylor always says that good data science starts with good questions, not fancy techniques. I haven't showed a single fancy technique here. It's just trying to think of the questions. A lot of this is just counting things. And speaking of questions, if you have any questions, and that's a link to the blog that we have in the data science team, where a lot of this is published, and we keep publishing little insights. I think the latest one was about the dress and gender. There are gender differences in how you see the dress, apparently.
Okay, before we start questions here, how about a round of applause for Dr. Carlos Duque? Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Because we are recording this event, because your questions are no doubt worthy of being immortalized in this way, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you as quickly as I can. All right, we'll start. Yep.
Can I ask you about how many data scientists in your team and in Palo Alto campus?
Yeah, so we are about 40 people now. What was your second part? So yeah, in Menlo Park, we are almost everyone, 35 of the 40 were in Menlo Park.
Hi, Carlos. Thank you so much for sharing some information that you've gathered over the year. I do a lot of behavioral analytics at my company. And the question that I'm always asking myself is, how do I understand intent? Because it's one thing when someone starts something and doesn't continue, or expresses an interest but doesn't follow through. So what are the behavioral characteristics, and what are the other, it's beyond demographics, but how do I segment and all these questions about how can I predict ultimately whether someone who signs up for our services is really going to stick with it to the point where we'll make money on it, right? And I'm kind of curious in terms of how those type of questions are being structured and being dressed, because I'm looking at Facebook also. We advertise a lot on it, and it's a very limited, tiny bit of data. So I'm always curious as to what you guys are doing with it behind the scenes.
Yeah, the question of intent is hard. So I didn't get into any details in any of these studies, but the first thing you have to do is filter. So you have massive amounts of data, but you have to throw away 95% of it. In a lot of these studies, it's okay, people who actually declared an anniversary that's before the day that they declare this, that they live in the US, that they, by age, that they are relatively active people. So you have all this massive amount of data, and then when you filter it out, it's, fortunately on Facebook, you filter it out, and then it's still a few 100,000 people. So a lot of the questions that we try to answer that deal with maybe a little bit of deeper, more complex questions, you have to filter it down, that you have to throw away so much data, but we're lucky enough that we can end up with enough data to still answer the question. So everything is biased, everything, none of the assumptions of normal statistics hold, because a lot of the assumptions are things are independent and all that, and this is not true. Things are Facebook changes, the way people use Facebook changes, there's contagion because it's a social network, so whatever you do affects everyone that sees that. So it's a very hard problem. I'm not gonna be able to really answer that question, but I think a lot of what we do is actually, at least of these 40 people, there are 5 or 6 who just, their full-time job is to think through these methodological questions and develop tools and new, how do we get rid, all of these assumptions that don't really hold, how do we change them, and how do we develop methods that don't need these assumptions? So Yeah, I don't know. Then, I mean, predicting who's going to stay and who's going to leave is like $1 billion question. Saying $1 million question now. Ooh. But good, eh? So a lot of, I mean, from Verizon to Comcast to Facebook to Google, they're all asking this question. So you have historical data. You can start looking at patterns of, what characteristics are of the people who stay and who don't stay on Facebook. We know that friends play a huge role, the size of your social network, the structure of your social network. So I don't know. This is part of the daily, day-to-day job. Sorry if I don't have like. Sorry, one more thing about intent. So I think there's a lot of developing in. So right now we don't understand text, we don't understand images. With this shift from desktop to mobile, text goes down, images go up, and we understand images even worse than what we understand text. So I think it's a race we're running. So it's like the more we start to understand text and image and video now, maybe the better that we're going to be able to infer these latent variables like intent and stuff like that.
Over here. Facebook can intentionally or even unintentionally change people's moods, or even maybe like the outcome of an election. What is your moral and ethical obligation to how you code your algorithms to show what you show on your feeds? I don't even know how to ask the question, but what's your obligation to help people have a more positive life or to have a consequence in like politics?
Yeah, so the one thing I can tell you is that this is taken very seriously, and that nobody's gonna manipulate an election. There are more and more, we're still learning about these things. We're still learning whether these things are true or not. Some of what you said, we only very recently learned that they might be true. So there's a lot of, actually in a sense we're able to do less and less of certain things. And there's a lot of, I think there are two big these messages, these philosophies that are very strong now are like sheep love and give more than you take. Make sure that whatever you do, if you're using somebody's data for something, that person is getting something in return that is positive, that is useful. And there are lots of teams and controls just working towards these things. So you could. I mean, I don't know of any particular. I mean, you're probably talking about the infamous emotion contagion thing. I don't want to get into that one, but we can get that on that one maybe offline. So I think we're still figuring that out, to be honest. But the one thing I can tell you is that there has been like a huge internal movement towards how do we self-control and make sure that whatever is being, yes, of course, you can run experiments on a bunch of things. I mean, there are like product type A/B tests being done all the time, like everywhere else, right? And a lot of the metrics today are concerned about like positivity and just what the user, is the user feels more engaged? Does the user get more likes? Does the user, things like that. Well, so that's very tricky. So there's a whole group called, I don't know what it's called, but they hold an annual thing called the Compassion Research Day, where they invite a lot of people. They're mostly focused on teens and a little bit, and a lot now also in suicide, like bullying, suicide, and these kinds of things. Mostly the thing that they do is provide options inside the product to help people. So if you see that somebody posted something that you think might be suicidal, you have a way to report it, and then there's an anonymous cycle where this person gets a message saying, somebody who knows you is concerned about you, these are things you can do, you can talk to someone, this is the number of a helpline, do you want us to connect you to a friend? So they developed all these like product-based things about just to help people. If you can report that you see a friend or people just trying to seek help. Whether you can infer that this is about to happen and actually take proactive It's very tricky, very sensitive, a little bit above my pay grade. I know that this is being discussed, but it's not clear. I mean, we infer that you are suicidal, so it's kind of creepy. So I don't know, we're all dealing with these questions. There's not a big answer. There is a whole team dealing with just the product side. What can we do on the product side? And on education and things like that. And then they focus a lot on teens, bullying, and suicide, but yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Natalia. Thank you so much for everything you share with us. And thank you to Patreon for hosting. My question was, now that you're gathering all this great data and organizing and visualizing it, how are you going to use it? What is one of the big things that you're trying to accomplish with this data?
Yeah, so a lot of what we do in the group is actually help Facebook, the product. So a lot of the insights that we developed are just trying to help people in product teams understand how people use their products, why people use their products, how to make their products better. That's mostly of our day jobs. We're also like a research team. We have a lot of like social scientists and people who are, we just think that, you know, with this data, we can help answer some maybe interesting questions from social science in general. So a lot of the stuff we publish either in academic conferences or just on our blog. So we try to make available some of these insights. A lot of these are for example, a lot of the stuff on relationships, it was just a group of us that we were interested in this. So we got, you know, every 2 weeks we got together to chat about it. And then for Valentine's Day last year, we decided to produce a bunch of blog posts. And then this year again, we produced one of those. So it's a little bit of a mix. A lot of this is basically product oriented. So just helping teams understand their users and their constituencies. Yeah.
Hi. Can you measure irony? And if so, how do you do it?
Yeah, no, I can't. Irony. So he asked if we can measure irony. And if so this is a question in like computational linguistics, and there are like academics trying to do this. A lot of the problems we have is that whatever we do, we have to do it at scale. So a lot of the text parsing stuff requires precisely that you parse the whole sentence, that you understand which is the noun phrase and which is the verb phrase and what modifies what. And that is something that can produce better results, but we cannot do at scale. So we have always that trade-off between, you know, how fancy the technique is and whether or not we can do it at scale. So we have, I showed how many posts are generated every day. Of course, we can do small studies where you download data, you run this. But irony is a hard one. The best I've seen recently is by, who's this guy, Rich Socher? They use fancy deep learning kind of approaches to text parsing. And they can at least fairly accurately identify like negations. And you know, when your sentence says something and at the end not, or all these complicated grammatical structures that, no, it's good to at least understand if this person is saying this or negating this. And irony is very hard. So one idea I had is to actually try to look at, for example, I talked about the positivity of text. And also we have this thing where you can say feeling so-and-so. So, you know, you have people posting all the terrible things that happened in their day and then feeling awesome or things like that. So maybe using that kind of negative text with a very positive like feeling to try to at least build a corpus of irony. But yeah.
Yeah, hi there. For the feeling question, do you guys do any sort of sampling on this or waiting after, or is it just census curious in terms of when you present the results? Are you trying to make it representative of Facebook's audience, or?
Yeah, so usually, I think on what I showed, I would have to go back maybe, but some of them are ratios normalized in some way. Usually, none of this was like weighted by Facebook audience. So it's not like reweighted. So, you know, if you look at the distribution of users by age or things like that, it doesn't follow population distributions. So you could adjust and multiply things, reweight things. We sometimes do that. There are a couple of people in the team actually trying to, it's not as simple. I mean, you could do just something as simple as reweighting, but there are all sorts of other biases that matter too, like, you know, how active a person is, how long they've been on Facebook. It's not just like age and gender or things like that. So there's a, like, matching treatment and control populations is a very hard problem.
I see. One more follow-up, please. Very interesting work you're doing. Curious about how you guys fund your department. Like, we might want to do the same kind of interesting things on our data. What funds you guys? Are you support? You said product, so, but is it direct dollars related to the funding of your team? How does that work?
No, so it's just it's just another team. We don't have any. It's not like, oh, I help this product team, so this product team gives our team certain amount of dollars. We're just other employees, yeah.
Hello. My question's sort of like the irony one, but I was curious if you measure things that people lie about. Because there should be, you know, like contradictions.
Lie about their age.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I do, for example, on Facebook. So I just wondered if there were other things that you were able to, like what kinds of things can you easily tell if someone's lying about or people are lying about in general? And were any of those surprising?
Yeah, I don't know if surprising. People lie about their age, people lie about their education. So if you count how many people claim to have gone to Harvard, I think it's bigger than all the Harvard alumni dead and alive. We have one that we know very precisely, which is the number of Facebook employees, and we know that people claim to be Facebook employees. So yeah, people lie about a bunch of things. You have methods to try to figure that out. We will never surface any of this, so we will never say you're lying. I mean, unless you detect like spammers, impersonators, other kinds of things like that. But if you're lying about your age, we might have an idea that that's not your real age, but there's not much we can do either. So. Yeah, I think I would say that the main patterns is that people are either younger or they claim to be 120. People overstate the prestige of their education. Then there are people, of course, whose profile is like, you know, I'm from Zimbabwe and I speak Japanese and I'm 95 years old. I mean, you have those profiles. But more on average, I think you have a few people who lie about these kinds of things. I don't think it's huge, though. And it varies a lot with culture. So there are, for example, certain countries where it's hard for a woman to be on Facebook. They get a lot of messages and comments and sometimes attacks, and it can be, you know, it can be physically dangerous. So in those countries, you see very few women, probably just women not saying they're women. You also see a lot of guys saying they're women to be able to friend women, and these kinds of things that are culture specific. But in general, in the US, I think you have a mix. I tend to believe that on average, and if you do sensible data cleaning, things more or less work out. It's not a huge thing.
Hi, Carlos. David here. The age of lowest positivity was 17. Could you speak a little bit more about what's showing up?
No one else can speak about that?
As the parent of a teenager, I'm quite interested.
Yeah, no, I have no idea, honestly. So there are some effects because, you know, the minimum age at which you can start at Facebook is 13. There is an effect of where people signed up for Facebook and claimed they were 13. So the age of teenagers, like whether you're 15, 16, 17, 18, or 19, I don't, you're a teen. So I can talk specifically about what's different between 17 and 16. We do see this trend of this dip throughout. I think there are also a lot of social norms involved. I don't think that, you know, all teens are depressed. It's probably that there are certain norms about what you say and what you don't say on Facebook, especially like in the US. or could be different in different countries. So, so maybe teens don't talk about how awesome their lives are on Facebook. It doesn't mean they're depressed. It's maybe a social norm. So, yeah, there's a lot of work. It hasn't really been done too much on teens, although the Compassion team does a little bit of this, more in-depth interviews. I think, I don't know, I don't have really the data to support this, but I think there's a lot of, it's a hard mix of social norms and what they are actually feeling and experiencing.
Hi. I have one question. I'm sure you make a lot of analysis, like between, like, you analyze words, semantics, images, videos, check-ins, categories. Which is the one that relies better, or which one is the one that gives you, like, the more clear information between all of them, or if there is some of all of them that you rely more?
Well, it depends on the question. I mean, in general, images are very hard. Images are very hard. But we can, so most people that, I don't know. No, it depends on the question. It's really, so text is hard, but I think we can do a lot of good things with text now. Usually people who check in are not lying about checking in. There are, of course, but you know, they say there are this restaurant in San Francisco or this national park. They usually post a photo, and so yeah, I don't know. I tend to believe that I don't think it's a single signal, but it's a combination of signals, and it's the average. And usually, for certain users, if they are active users, and you can kind of from the structure of the social network also tell that they are reliable users or things like that.
Thank you for that talk. That was awesome.
Thanks.
So Facebook is a product first, and that drives the vast majority of the decisions about it. But as you've shown, it's also an amazing scientific tool. What are some of the changes that you would like to make or have been made to the product purely to make it a better scientific instrument?
Oh, well, yeah. Usually that's not really prioritized.
I know.
So one thing that we have and that we have worked, some people have worked a lot in is, for example, a survey tool. So a lot of people like to run surveys. So we have a fairly sophisticated survey tool. It's this annoying megaphone that appears on your newsfeed saying, would you mind answering this survey? But that has been a great, I think, scientific tool but we have to deploy it carefully and, you know, not be spamming everyone with that kind of stuff. No, we usually don't make changes just to make it more scientifically interesting. There are some experiments that have a clear product impact, and maybe also like a side product. It's a scientific question. I know there's a lot of work that Lara Adamic and other people do about like memes and false information that's circulated and these cascades of lies that are produced. And there are things like, you know, how can we, maybe it's not answering the question, but it's an interesting scientific question, like what's virality, why things go viral, what do people believe, what do people don't believe, what do people spread, and what not. But it's also a thing that affects the product. So, you know, if you open your Facebook and it's all memes and all conspiracy theories, people probably won't like that. So, you know, there was some work about like down-ranking things like clickbait. So these are, you know, questions that have scientific interest, the question of virality and contagion, and then they have a product impact. So what do you propose as, you know, related things? So there's a lot of, now if you click on something that's clearly a lie, there might be as a related link, like a Snopes link, saying that it's false, you know, things like that.
Hi, can you tell us about some trends among your most like top highly engaged users?
No. Sorry. So interesting trends. I don't know. I mean, the thing, so what's happening now, and I think it matters for everyone working here, is that mobile photos and video are huge. So, and they're growing among like younger people. So a lot of the stuff that we do, we might soon need to change the way we do it. We're gonna have to like understand new things that we don't understand. So I think, yeah, a highly engaged user is very different from maybe 4 or 5 years ago. They're posting more photos and videos, and everyone's social networks are larger. So everyone has more friends, more diverse friends. So I think it's clearly changing a lot. I don't know if I have a single anecdote of something interesting to share like that, but I think these are the main things.
Hi, excellent talk, thank you very much.
Thank you.
One thing I'm curious about is just some of the underlying technology and behind the scenes. Say you have a particular interest in finding out, for example, happiness metrics across different countries and so on. What kind of process is required to run these queries? Obviously, the amounts of data are vast. Is it something where you can get an answer pretty quickly, or does it require large approval from within the team and then constructing queries that run over the course of months?
So like internally?
Yeah.
So there is a whole approval process for publishing and for posting even these blog posts. We don't have something like, universities have the IRBs, the institutional review boards, but we do have kind of a similar thing now. So there is quite some process, especially for making things public. So if it's something that's product related, you're not changing you're not changing anyone's experience. You're just observing historical data for some internal insight. There's quite a lot of freedom, and you can do it fairly quickly. Well, depends on what you have to do, but just getting the raw data that then you'll have to clean for weeks. That's something you can do fairly quickly, but there's quite some process if you're gonna either affect a user's experience or publish this. Yeah.
Carlos, maybe I could ask a question.
Sure.
In the realm of search, I think it might be safe to say that Google has a lock on that, temporary perhaps, a lock on that industry. In the area of social networking, can you imagine what kind of company might arise that could give Facebook serious competition?
I don't know. So, no, I don't know. And so there's the global aspect. So I think most of the companies are starting in the US, so there might be, even if they are competition, they are US only for the time being. And I think so far, like the way people use Facebook evolves. Facebook evolves too. So I'm not sure. I think no company has lasted forever, and no company. I mean, we know the story of companies here, but I mean, for me to say what might happen, it's very hard. Honestly, it's very hard. I'm sure there are people who think about this deeper than I do, but yeah, I don't know.
So Patreon's not a big threat?
No, because it's redirecting people to awesome content that's being posted on Facebook, right? And YouTube.
Thank you, Dr. Carlos Duque, very much. Please join me in thanking you.
Thanks.
No one really knows why gravity exists. Naming something doesn't mean that we get it. So I'll live each day